is a special presentation of HBO Sports. There are prize fights that assume mythological proportions and worldly significance because they reflect and sometimes influence forces beyond the ring. Johnson, Jeffries. A turn-of-the-century racial conflict between an irreverent black athlete and a beloved white champion. Lewis, Schmeling. At the dawn of World War II, a showdown that represented the battle between democratic ideals and Nazi intolerance. Ali, Liston. In the civil rights 60s, a free-thinking young champion embraces a threatening religious sect between fights with a terrifying opponent. Frazier, Ali. During the Vietnam War, an electrifying event that mirrors a deeply divided country. We examine the stormy atmospheres around 4 historic battles.
In this corner, boxing's historic battles.
Hello, I'm Jim Lampley. This edition of In This Corner examines 4 historic heavyweight championship fights, each of which can ultimately be seen as something much greater than a prize fight. 4 events which marked their times, which remain embedded in our national lore and memory, as much for what happened outside the ring as in the ring. We lead off with a drama that revealed America's darkest heart. Early in the century, it set off race riots. Much later in the century, it resonated still via a famous Broadway play and then a movie, The Great White Hope. Jack Johnson against Jim Jeffries, at a time in America when most still took white to mean right as well as might. It was staged in Reno, Nevada, because no other place would have it.
In this corner, Jack Johnson versus Jim Jeffries.
On the plains of the Sagebrush State, the white man and the Negro will settle the muted question of racial superiority.
Nevada historian Philip Earle.
Somebody once said that in the first 3 decades of this century, that the only social event that was bigger than the Johnson-Jeffries fight was Lindbergh's flight to Europe and then his return to the United States. It was big. It was important.
It came during an era when heavyweight champions routinely refused to fight black contenders, a practice started by the original American heavyweight champion, John L. Sullivan, in the 1880s. But on December 26, 1908, a Canadian-born champion, Tommy Burns, agreed to fight Johnson in Australia, and Johnson, to the dread of American fans, captured the greatest title in all of sports. Boxing historian Bert Sugar.
This was not a changing of the guard as it had been when Corbett beat Sullivan, or when Fitzsimmons beat Corbett, or even when Jim Jeffries beat Fitzsimmons. This was a rupture of the total chain. A black man had beaten a white man.
Professor of history Julian Bond.
This white nation needed a white champion to represent it. The person who's going to stand at the top of this pinnacle has to be reflective of the nation. Johnson certainly wasn't.
While Jack Johnson celebrated and traveled the world, the frantic search began for the man who could return the title to the Caucasian race. Boxing historian Hank Kaplan.
They started what was then known as the White Hope campaign. Kids came off the farms and out of the lumber camps, the mining camps, for a spot among the White Hopes. Just about all of them failed. At least none of them seemed to have a shot at Johnson. And so the only hope left was the previously retired Jim Jeffries, who had not had a glove on in 6 years. He was the hope of the people who wanted a change.
Bert Sugar.
Jack London, writing for the New York Herald, wrote, "One thing remains. Jeffries must emerge from his alfalfa farm and remove that smile from Johnson's face. And then, as if to add an emphasis, he said, "Jeff, it's up to you."
Despite Jeffries' long absence, the adoring public truly believed that the former undefeated heavyweight champion was still unbeatable, still the strongest man in the world, a living legend. Boxing historian Earl Gustke.
His friends told a story of Jeffries in 1902, 1903 as a relatively young man on a hunting trip in the Tehachapi Mountains near Bakersfield, California, killing a deer and carrying it on his back 9 miles to his campsite without stopping once. He was just a phenomenal physical specimen.
At age 35, living in Burbank, California, and weighing more than 300 pounds, Jeffries, physical specimen no more, embarked on one of the greatest comebacks in boxing history.
Less than 1 year before the bout, Jeffries took all that weight off, went into extremely hard training, got his body back in shape, and weighed 227 for this fight. So physically, he looked as invincible as he did 6 years prior to that when he was champion.
And most Americans desperately wanted to believe that Jeffries was still their champion, because at a time when it was illegal for blacks and whites to marry or cohabitate, the ebullient Johnson flaunted his disdain for custom and convention. Author, historian, Randy Roberts.
One night he was tired. He walked into a hotel and requested a room. It was a whites-only hotel, and a white hotel manager looks up to him and says, "I'm sorry, we don't serve your kind here." Johnson repeats it, "May I have a room?" "Sorry, we don't serve your kind here." Jack Johnson laughed and says, "You're mistaken. The room isn't for me, it's for my wife. She's one of your kind."
This irrepressible son of a slave used the power and visibility of the heavyweight championship as any man might, which was seen as liberating by blacks and dangerous by whites.
Jack Johnson was part of the first generation of blacks born free in the United States. He was born after the Emancipation Proclamation at the tail end of Reconstruction. I think he was probably the first truly emancipated African American and would absolutely refuse to accept the dictates of white society. If he wanted to drive fast cars, he was going to do it. If he wanted to date and marry white women, he was going to do it. In their own more limited ways, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois were talking about some sort of emancipation, mostly economic, political emancipation. Jack Johnson wanted it all.
And so the monumental Johnson-Jeffries showdown was arranged for Independence Day, July 4th, 1910. Jeffries was the instrument not of independence, but of dependence.
Here's a fight originally scheduled for San Francisco. Great political pressure is brought to bear on the governor of California. The fight's shifted out of California and goes to Reno. Reno is viewed in 1910 as kind of an eyesore in America. It's a place that allows open gambling. It's a place that allows open drinking. It's considered the divorce capital of the world.
I'm on my way to Reno. I'm leaving town today. Give my regards to all the boys and girls along Broadway. Once I get my liberty, no more wedding bells for me. Shall sing the battle cry of freedom.
And suddenly, the evil forces, the minions from around America descend upon Reno. Gamblers, hitmen, confidence men, pickpockets, prostitutes, sports of every kind and variety. Suddenly, this town of 15,000 people swells up to 50,000. For a moment, Reno, this tiny town, is the center of America.
It was estimated that over 1 million words a day were generated by the 2,000 reporters in town. By reading the cartoons of the day, it was vividly clear that racism was the fabric of this fight. Professor of Afro-American Studies, Dr. William H. Wiggins, Jr.
The cartoons were important because what they're doing is they're reflecting the attitudes of the country at that time. The New York Times ran a cartoon in which the two men are in the ring. Johnson is the quintessential ape-like figure. He's black, he has a bullet head, the arms are below the knees, has this massive chest that comes into this small waistline and so forth. On the other hand, Jeffries, who's just the opposite, just looks like a matinee idol. You got all these American flags that are being waved out here by little old ladies. So you can see very clearly Johnson as the outsider. Jeffries is representing the American way.
The odds on the fight actually favored the old champion to beat the young champion in his prime. That's how much white fans wanted Jeffries to win. Philip Earl.
Those who were able to make judgments about fighters put their money on Jack Johnson. You know, I saw one guy, and he said that he went down to the railroad depot when Johnson came in, and he said, "That's the meanest nigger I ever saw." And he said, "So I went down and put all my money on that nigger."
Reporters remembered the order with which the drunken mob, 15,000 to 20,000 strong, moved towards the stadium on the outskirts of Reno and checked their firearms at the gate. How they poured through the four tunnel-like entrances into the huge eight-sided arena. A brass band climbed into the ring and played All Coons Look Alike to Me and other patriotic selections. It was a picture of boisterous American innocence, confident that Jeffries would triumph in the racial confrontation. From Papa Jack, by Randy Roberts.
But the legs and reflexes of this once great fighter were no more. Jeffries was butchered by the sneering Galveston giant. Scheduled for 45 rounds, Johnson ended it in 15. Etta Moten Barnett remembers the day.
We were in Palestine, Texas, and Papa had this Sunday school picnic for the time when Jack Johnson was going to fight. The young boys from Western Union would come out there on a bicycle and bring the round. When they did come and said that Jack Johnson had knocked out Jeffries, the thing broke loose with joy, with joy. The next day in Galveston, Texas, Jack Johnson's sister had also knocked out a white man because he had insisted that she get off of the sidewalk when he was coming, and she did not care to do this. She knocked him out. That was my memory, great memory of the Jack Johnson fight.
Earl Gustke.
President Theodore Roosevelt, the night of the fight, was at Sagamore Hill, New York, his vacation home, and he kept telephoning the local telegraph office, asking for a result of the fight. And when he finally got it, according to the Western Union operator at the telegraph office, the president uttered an explosive expletive and hung up the phone. But that pretty much characterized white America's reaction to a black man beating a beloved white champion.
Hope had lived in thousands of breasts until the last minute, and then their idol crumbled, and this black man stood above them, peerless. They could not help but admire him, and there was little animosity shown toward him. For the most part, the people were silent, readjusting things in their minds. Associated Press.
As word of the outcome swept America, race rioting broke out in every major city. As blacks celebrated, whites would attack them. There were 5,000 cases of disorderly conduct. Hundreds were injured. 19 were killed. Randy Roberts.
There's been two events in American history that have precipitated widespread racial violence. One of the events was the assassination of Martin Luther King. The other event was the Jack Johnson-Jim Jeffries fight.
Bert Sugar.
And Congress passed a law that said that there would be no interstate commercing or trafficking of the fight films because they did not want to further aggravate the potential riots. And in fact, stayed in effect from 1910 to to the mid-30s.
A black correspondent named William Pickens wrote, "It was better for Johnson to win and a few blacks be killed in body than for Johnson to lose and all the blacks be killed in spirit."
For blacks, this was the greatest achievement, provided the greatest hope since the Emancipation Proclamation, a historic milestone on the road toward equality.
Amazing Grace, how sweet it sounds. Jack Johnson knocked Jim Jeffries down. Jim Jeffries jumped up and hit Jack in the chin, and then Lord, Jack knocked him down again. The Yankees hold the play. The white man pulls the trigger. But it makes no difference what the white men say. The world champion's still a nigger. This is what the black community felt, is yes, the power is in the hands of the white, but it doesn't make a difference. That on this one day, for this one moment, the world champion's a black man, and they can't take this away from us.
That glory road remained a forked road long after the rioting and the shouting had stopped. Jim Jeffries went back to his farm, graciously acknowledging that on his very best day, he could never have beaten the champion. But Jack Johnson, hounded by trumped-up legal charges, fled the law and eventually the country. And the aftermath of Johnson-Jeffries was so traumatic that no black heavyweight was again permitted to challenge for the crown for another 27 years. By that time, Joe Louis had become, in effect, a great black hope. But on one memorable occasion at Yankee Stadium, and then afterward forevermore, he was the red, white, and blue hope.
In this corner, Joe Louis versus Max Schmeling.
The time is 1936. Hitler is in Germany. The Depression is in the United States. It is the worst of times. Into the setting step two of the unlikeliest characters ever seen in sport.
Joe Louis and Max Schmeling would meet twice in the ring. With the rise of Hitler in Germany sending the world hurtling toward another great war, their second fight was seen in 1938 as a direct challenge to the Nazi theory of a superior Aryan race. Joe Louis's son, Joe Louis Barrow, Jr.
When I talked to my father about it, he always got very serious about that fight. Because in addition to it being a heavyweight championship bout, it was freedom against the Aryan race. It was democracy pitted against Hitler's fascism. And so it took on tremendous overtones.
A former heavyweight champion, Max Schmeling represented the strength, the ability, and the hopes of the German people. Professor of German Studies, David Bathrick.
Schmeling was already kind of symbol for a lot of things much earlier than this fight. I mean, he became a very successful boxer in the 1920s and the so-called Weimar period, and at that point became a kind of icon for a lot of artists and a lot of sort of cultural commentators.
Ingrid Jive Rothbard remembers growing up in Berlin during that time.
Schmeling was very well known to all of us, even as children. He was one of those glamorous sports figures that we heard about. And I knew about the fight because we were told about the brown bomber, which was Louis. He was called Der Braune Bomber.
The son of a poor sharecropper, Joe Louis migrated to Detroit from Alabama. Before his first fight with Schmeling in 1936, Louis's popularity was confined primarily to the black community.
But the best is Harlem when a Joe Louis fight is through.
Civil rights activist Jim Brown.
Black folks really loved him and used him as a champion in a sense against white people. Their one way of speaking up, of hitting back.
Louis seemed unbeatable. Black folks gathered to listen to his bouts on radios, seeing him as one who preached joyful deliverance with his fists. Fight fan Chester Commodore.
Every home, the window was open, every radio was blasting, so you could go along the street and even hear how the fight's coming along. You could stop in front of somebody's house for a few minutes, but then you'd hear somebody cheering over there, "Get him, Joe! That's right. Throw a left, throw a right. So you move on down to the next house. To me, I would say that was the original Walkman.
Columnist Jerry Eisenberg.
A good friend of mine who was raised down in Grambling, Louisiana, which is an all-black town, and he told stories of him sitting around the radio at night and listening and being afraid to come out after Lewis won because of the Klan. And they would stay overnight and go back the next day.
In 1936, Max Schmeling arrived confidently in New York for his first fight against the Brown Bomber. His arrival, however, was a stark contrast to his departure from Germany. Professor Dr. Lawrence McNamee.
Hitler and the party simply didn't want him to go. Germany was race conscious, and they couldn't forgive him for A, fighting a Negro, and second, for fighting a Negro who everybody was saying the odds were 10 to 1 that he was going to be defeated by.
Writer Sam Lacey.
There were a number of people who rooted for Schmeling merely because he was white, forgetting the fact that he was a German and that Germany at that particular moment in history was trying to dismantle a whole idea of democracy.
Joe Louis would suffer his first defeat.
Berlin shortwave radio to overseas in English was having a field day as it broadcast the result of Joe Louis's shocking knockout by Max Schmeling in their fight. This proves, purred the Oxford English voice, that the Aryan is superior to the non-Aryan in the prize ring, just as he is intellectually. Lester Bromberg.
Schmeling returned to Germany a hero. David Bathrick.
He's offered this free place on the Hindenburg and comes back in the 50-hour flight from New York to Berlin. He comes back, and within the day, he's having tea in the Reichschank. And they sat there together, Hitler and Schmeling and all of them, watching this unedited footage of this fight.
1936 Olympian Marty Glickman.
It was important for Germany and for Hitler that Schmeling win that fight, particularly since, right after that fight, that Nazi myth of Aryan supremacy was simply smashed to smithereens by the great black athletes of America at the 1936 Olympic Games.
In 1937, Joe Louis knocked out James Braddock to win the heavyweight championship. Germany expected Max to regain that title in their rematch set for next year. Author, historian, Randy Roberts.
The same sort of philosophy of superiority that American whites felt during the era of the Jack Johnson fight is now felt by Nazi Germany. Max Schmeling is their hero. Max Schmeling is their Superman, Ubermensch. He's fighting an American, but not only an American black.
People think that I'm going to the ring gun-shy. Why should I go into the ring gun-shy when Schmeling is 2 years older and I'm 2 years smarter in boxing?
This is the 5th time I crossed the ocean to try to win back the championship of the world. I'm ready to fight Joe Louis any place, any time, anywhere.
David Bathrick.
In 1938, he arrives back for the second fight, and already as he gets off the boat, there is a lot of picketing, and there's a lot of anger, and obviously he realizes that he's become a representative of the Nazis and of all of the ideology around them.
Boxing historian Bert Sugar.
By now, everything is heightened. You can hear the German hobnail boots, the jack boots coming down the streets in Germany. There are even sympathizers here in the U.S. They're called Bundists, the German Bund. And when Louis opens up his training camp in Pompton Lakes, New Jersey, for his fight against Schmeling, the Americans dressed in Nazi uniforms show up to heckle him. Meanwhile, at Schmeling's camp, Max Machon, his trainer, strutting around in a German uniform, a Nazi uniform, giving Sig Heils all over the place.
The drama intensified as Nazi sympathizers joined forces with America's most rabid hate-mongers. Jerry Eisenberg.
They made an alliance with the Klan at one point. They were very, very vocal about Schmeling. Then you had the Jews from the Garment Center. They were very vocal about Lewis. You had all these forces coming together, and they all were going to come together that night at Yankee Stadium.
Lewis became a symbol of America when Roosevelt felt his muscles and proclaimed, "These are the kind of muscles we need to beat Germany." And Germany's representative got his own boost when he received a telegram from the Fuhrer wishing Maxie good luck.
Max Schmeling had to be escorted from his dressing room to the ring by 20 policemen because people were throwing Coke cups at him and cigarette cartons at him.
Joe Louis Barrow, Jr.
He said that in a matter of 10 minutes, he walked out of his dressing room and he was facing Joe Louis in that first round. He said that he normally was a chess player when he fought, and he liked to feel out his opponents. And he wanted to feel my dad out for the first 1 or 2 rounds to determine how he was going to fight him. He said on that night, June 22nd, 1938, no one could have beaten your father. Your father had a level of intensity, a level of will that was just not seen in any other boxer.
Marty Glickman.
Joe Louis actually beat him virtually to a pulp. Max Schmeling was badly hurt. He screamed with pain when he was hitting the kidneys near the beginning of that fight. He literally screamed. And then he was beyond any kind of relief after that because Joe had the upper hand and he just pummeled him.
After just 2 minutes, 4 seconds of the first round, it was over. Joe Louis had successfully defended his championship and upheld America's honor.
When my father defeated Max Schmeling, he emerged as a true American hero. It was a sense that allowed people who heretofore couldn't embrace Joe Louis because he was a black man. White America embraced him as an American hero. They all of a sudden said, this is an American who's holding up the flag for freedom and democracy.
Marty Glickman.
Coming back from Yankee Stadium that night, coming through Harlem, it was one huge party. The streets were jammed with people. Everyone was jumping with joy and shouting and yelling and dancing and singing, and it was unadulterated joy.
Louis later volunteered for the Army and traveled the country conducting exhibitions and entertaining the troops. America was humbled by his commitment and his attitude. After his loss to Louis, Schmeling became the GOAT of Germany. No Hindenburg was sent to pick him up this time. Instead, after being hospitalized for 2 weeks, he went home on a stretcher by boat.
Schmeling's reward from the fatherland was to be sent jumping out of airplanes over enemy-held islands. Jim Murray.
Schmeling's friend, Ludwig Maibaum.
In government circles, they talked about him as no longer being useful. It was very hurtful, and they took it personal. Max was a thing of the past, no longer worthy, and he could no longer be used as a role model since he lost against a black man. He had to overcome all this alone.
For Schmeling, this loss proved to be a blessing. Now he no longer had to play the role of the Aryan showpiece, while Louis remained a symbol of hope around the world. Joe Louis Barrow, Jr.
Germans have told me, and Jews have told me, that without question, that fight made the difference in their lives. One time I was talking with someone and they said, I'll tell you what the 1938 fight meant to me. When I was in the concentration camps, I knew the Germans were not going to win because Joe Louis had already defeated Max Schmeling. And I just had chills when I learned that story, because all of a sudden, here my father, across the pond, 2,000 miles away, was inspiring a Jew in the concentration camps to survive the Holocaust because he had already defeated Max Schmeling. Max Schmeling was important to Joe Louis, and Joe Louis was important to Max Schmeling. I think they both had to endure the political environment in which they fought, but yet they didn't allow the racism of their countries to separate them as individuals. And I think that's probably one of the most important legacies of Joe Louis and the Max Schmeling fight, is that those two people emerged as human beings and as friends.
Joe Louis would live out his life as an all-American legend. As sports writer Jimmy Cannon put it, he's a credit to his race, the human race. Along with Jesse Owens and Jackie Robinson, Joe Louis helped create the groundswell for the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, which in turn, ironically, paved the way for a throwback to Jack Johnson, the outrageous Muhammad Ali. Ali's first major outrage after taking the title from Sonny Liston was to loudly, publicly change his religion, becoming a member of the feared black Muslim sect. That conversion would have repercussions at Ali's rematch with Liston in the obscure town of Lewiston, Maine.
In this corner, Muhammad Ali versus Sonny Liston.
After 15 months of Senate investigation, hernial surgery to the champion, an 11th hour switch to a new site, and threats to the champion's life, suddenly, it's heavyweight title fight time again.
I'm the king of the world. Hold it. Hold it. You're not that crazy. I'm a bad man. Wait. I shook up the world. Joe, I shook up the world.
Nobody realized at first what a special fighter or what a special person Ali was going to be.
Author, historian, Nigel Collins.
Yes, he won a gold medal at the Olympics. Yes, he was brash, great for publicity. He spouted poetry. He picked around. But people had a tendency, and especially people within the boxing business, to sort of laugh him off.
Don't you have any respect for him at all as a fighter?
As a fighter, I think he should be locked up impersonating a fighter.
On February 25th, 1964, fast-talking, light-footed heavyweight Cassius Marcellus Clay went in the ring with fearsome powerhouse Charles Sonny Liston. Unbelievably, Liston, tired and frustrated, quit after the 6th round, claiming an injured shoulder. The new heavyweight champion was like no other before him or since, in style and substance. Football great Jim Brown.
After the fight, everyone thought we were going to go over to the Fountain Blue at one of the major hotels on the beach and talk to the girls, and Ali said, nope. We're going to go back to this little black motel, and I'm going to talk to you about the Nation of Islam.
Cassius is not my name no more. Officially Muhammad Ali now. Muhammad Ali, right. Muhammad Ali. That's my name.
Cassius? You know my new name.
Muhammad.
Keep calling me that.
Will your next fight be billed as Cassius Clay or as Muhammad Ali?
Muhammad Ali.
On all the fights?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Muhammad Ali would use this victory as a platform to publicly unveil his membership in the Nation of Islam. Civil rights activist Julian Bond.
The Nation of Islam were incredibly controversial. They were the boogeymen of American racial politics. Their most prominent spokesman, Malcolm X, was viewed by many as a fierce and frightening figure. And for this man, Cassius Clay, to become Muhammad Ali and to identify himself with the religion, with the theology, with the philosophy, was just a thunderbolt to many people.
When Malcolm X started his own confrontational faction of the Nation of Islam, Ali remained loyal to its originator, Elijah Muhammad. But his association with the Muslims placed him in a bleak category, similar to that of Sonny Liston. Liston, the ex-convict, the labor goon, the unpopular villain. Writer, Mort Sharnick.
He had a reputation as being a bad guy. He had been a leg breaker for the unions in St. Louis and Chicago. He really was a mob minion.
Leading up to their rematch, November 16th that same year at the Boston Garden, Liston was constantly harassed by Ali. But the ex-champion seemed determined to win back his title. Nigel Collins.
Liston was deeply ashamed of quitting on his stool in the first fight with Clay. and threw himself into training like he hadn't done in years.
But leading up to that bout, things began to go awry.
On Friday the 13th, the heavyweight champion of the world, Cassius Clay, was carted off to a Boston hospital suffering from a hernia.
Columnist Jerry Eisenberg.
Typical Ali. He never did anything halfway. Well, now there was no fight.
Liston camp member Milt Bailey.
That's the fight that I hope had it came off. Sonny would have won his title back. Disappointed, he went back to St. Louis. He never could get back in shape.
The fight was rescheduled for May 25th, 1965. But in April, Boston bailed out. Ali's connection with the Muslims, Liston's reputed ties with the mob, and Senate investigations surrounding the first fight all played a part. It became a fight with no home until the city of Lewiston, Maine agreed to host the rematch. Nigel Collins.
They set it on Lewiston, Maine because they'd take them. You know, that's not where they wanted to go. It was like, you know, a small industrial town that happened to have a minor league ice hockey rink where they could have the fight.
After the assassination of Malcolm X earlier in the year, the fear spread that the warring factions of the Nation of Islam would disrupt the fight.
Several gentlemen visited Sonny Liston in training camp. They claimed to be members of the black Muslims. And they told him that if he won the fight, there'd be a bullet waiting for him.
Ali's physician, Bertie Pacheco.
They had state troopers stopping cars before the day of the fight, thinking that loads of mafia gunmen were going to come in there. Ali didn't give any substance to all that. All the people around him did, and everybody was worried sick about it. But he didn't. He didn't think anything of it.
This will be the thrilling and the most dramatic fight in the history of all fights. Get you in seat and relax. Fight is scheduled for 15 rounds if there's no machine guns or bombs fired. So enjoy yourself and be among those who dare to dare.
Before fans had a chance to settle into their seats, a quick, stunning right, one that Liston and many others didn't see, ended the fight in round one. Bedlam and controversy erupted. Bertie Pacheco.
Ali had made Liston think he's crazy. That's exactly what Liston testified to. I've got a crazy guy up there. He's standing over me. I mean, if he got him back over to a neutral corner, I'll stand up and we'll keep on fighting. Nobody does. The referee doesn't continue the count. He doesn't know what to do. He does not do. Out of the audience comes Nat Fleischer, who's 90 years old, with a watch in his hand, and says, it's been 17 seconds since Sonny's down. In the meantime, while everybody's saying, what'd you say? They got up and they got started fighting again. Then he'd think, well, if it's been down 17 seconds, the fight must be over. So they stopped the fight and gave it to him. A carnival of mistakes.
As to insinuations that Liston got hit with a phantom punch, the governor of Maine admitted he didn't see it, but countered that one of his party saw it with binoculars. High-powered jobs, undoubtedly. Oscar Frehley.
Didn't I say you will have a shocking surprise? Didn't I say that if I tell you what's going to happen, you might not come? Didn't I say if I tell you what's going to happen and do it, the people may say it's a fake?
Liston's friend, Lem Banker.
Nobody saw the punch. It was a phantom punch. You couldn't knock Sonny down with a sledgehammer. He was one of the strongest human beings I've ever met.
Lewiston resident, Bob Pacious.
Oh, no way it was a phantom punch. It was a tremendous punch. He was hit hard, and he went down like a felled ox.
Writer, Jack McKinney.
Anybody who watches the films today can see that that punch was not sufficient to knock down a lightweight, let alone a heavyweight.
I hit him with a punch that Jack Johnson used called the anchor punch. Stephen Fetcher, the old great Hollywood movie star, as I told you, he's working with me. Anchor punch, and that's a sharp? How'd he go step? Down? How'd you say it? It's short. Just a short, crisp punch.
What's the question?
What happened?
What happened? Got hit by a right hand.
Where?
Wrong expression on the cheekbone. Right on the cheekbone.
The fight mob moved out of Poland Spring, Maine, and the sweet air that maniacs breathe freshened again. Not so in Washington and Boston and Sacramento, where the politicians crowd the public trough. Ban boxing, cried the statesmen. And the ones who cried the loudest were those who had been furthest from the scene, where Sonny Liston fell down. Red Smith.
Lem Banker.
After Sonny lost the title, we used to travel around, and one fellow recognized him, and he said, "You're Sonny Liston, aren't you?" Sonny always had a great sense of humor. He said, "What happened up in Maine, Sonny?" He says, "Three things went wrong. First of all, Robert Goulet forgot the words of the national anthem. Second, Jersey Joe Walcott, who was a referee, he lost track of the count. And he says, number three, I forgot to get up."
The controversies surrounding the Lewiston fiasco marked a turning point in Ali's career. Earlier, as Cassius Clay, he had been viewed as a more or less innocuous class clown. Imagine a heavyweight who danced in white tassel shoes, spouted poetry, and poked fun at his opponents. Unheard of. But when he changed his name and his religion and denounced racism in America, some began to see him as dangerous. When he refused to go off to war in Vietnam, he was stripped of his title and barred from boxing. Joe Frazier was declared the interim title holder. And when those two unbeaten champions finally met in Madison Square Garden, it was truly the fight of the century.
In this corner, Joe Frazier versus Muhammad Ali.
Shrewd, pre-fight publicity turned the billing into Frazier the Good Citizen versus Ali the Draft Dodger. Frazier, the simple Bible-reading Baptist, versus Ali, the slogan-sprouting black Muslim.
Many people ask me, what will happen if you ever fight Joe Frazier? So I have a little poem. Frazier keeps backing, but there's not enough room. It's a matter of time. Valley lowers the boom. Now he lands with a right. What a beautiful swing. And the punch lifts Frazier clean out of the ring. Frazier still rising. And the referee wears a frown. For he can't start counting till Frazier comes down. Now Frazier disappears from view. The crowd is getting frantic. But our radar stations have picked him up. He's somewhere over the Atlantic. Who would have thought when they came to the fight that they would witness the launching of a colored satellite?
On March 8, 1971, Muhammad Ali would enter the ring against Joe Frazier in one of the most widely anticipated sporting events of the 20th century. The fight had been building for over 3 years. Ali had become still more controversial because of his refusal to be drafted. Vietnam veteran, Senator Bob Kerrey.
I mean, I remember conversations with friends in Vietnam, and our conclusion was that this man had courage. He had taken a principled stand. He wasn't angry at us, didn't disrespect what we were doing. He merely said that he wasn't going to do it. He took the consequences head on. We presumed, I think correctly, that he had the capacity to weasel his way out of it, like lots of people did. Lots of my friends did.
Black people have died on foreign soil fighting in all of America's wars, still doing so.
Writer Jack McKinney.
He was the man that stood up to the ultimate power in the world, the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff. If you recall his famous line, "No Viet Cong ever called me nigger." That may have cost him a lot of points in public opinion in the United States, but it made him a demigod internationally.
Exiled from boxing in June of 1967, his championship stripped, Ali would not return for almost 3.5 years. Ali's friend, Jim Brown.
So when Ali came back, he more or less embraced people and enjoyed being Ali, enjoyed fighting again, and never was the same revolutionary, adamant kind of speaker. And the Joe Frazier fight was probably going to be the most important fight of his life.
For Joe Frazier, the fight would be the defining moment of his career. It was his opportunity to legitimize the vacated title he had won by knocking out Jimmy Ellis with the best left hook in boxing. Frazier's friend, Joe Hand.
There's a reason why Joe Frazier had such a powerful left hook. Joe Frazier's father only had one arm. When Joe was just a little boy down on the farm, his father would pick up things with his right hand, and Joe would have to pick them up with his left. So the power in Joe's left arm was there from when he was a little kid.
Harry Markson, then the president of Madison Square Garden Boxing, remembers the initial offer to Frazier.
I said to Yancey, Durham, we are prepared to offer $1,250,000 to your fighter. Now, Joe Frazier was sitting at a desk with a yellow pad in front of him, and they started to light and light and light. And they discussed this for an unconscionably long time. Finally, I peeked over their shoulder, and I discovered that they just didn't know how to light $1,250,000. They had 1, 2, 5, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Both fighters ultimately settled on $2.5 million, the most ever paid an athlete in any sport for one performance.
Commissioner, may we proceed? Ali, what do you say you're going to do to Frazier?
All I say, here's the agitator. Have a go After the fight's over and Frazier has caught hell, I'm going to jump over the rope and finish Cosell.
Immediately, sides were drawn. Writer, Larry Merchant.
More white people were rooting for Frazier, who seemed to embody more of the old-fashioned virtues of prize fighters as a strong, hard-working, silent type, and Ali was this handsome, devilish, outrageous character who was taunting this rather plain-looking, not very verbal, but very worthy prize fighter, and so sympathies broke along those lines.
Writer, broadcaster, Dick Schaap.
If you were anti-black, you rooted for Joe Frazier. If you were anti-hippie, you rooted for Joe Frazier. If you were pro-Vietnamese War, you rooted for Joe Frazier. Not meaning that Frazier himself personified any of these things, but that's just who you preferred. But if you were young and at all rebellious and cared at all about style, you rooted for Ali.
The fight became a worldwide event. 1960s counterculture guru, Dr. Timothy Leary, was living in Algiers at the time.
It was unbelievable that these lower middle-class people in a small Algerian village would care about, a boxing match in America. And they were just going crazy. And I was reading the papers all around the North African belt, Tunisia, Egypt, Iraq. They were cheering Ali. They knew that he was against the American government, and they knew that he was against the war, and they knew that he was persecuted by the government. Basically, he was an anti-American against American politics, which we all were.
Jack McKinney was living in Belfast, Ireland.
There had been a split in the IRA. Charlie Hughes, who was a lieutenant in the provisionals, was shot dead by the officials in Belfast, and an all-out feud began. So you had two underground guerrilla forces in a state of war. And believe it or not, there was a stand-down called later that day The chief reason they called the truce was that everybody wanted to watch the Ali-Frazier fight. Such are the footnotes of history, right?
Another footnote was that independent backers who put up unprecedented guarantees outbid traditional fight promoters to stage the show. Jack Kent Cook.
For the first time, instead of relying on the people who were running the auditoriums, the theaters, and the arenas, Arthur Young and Company, which was my auditor at the time, engaged some 100 or 150 young auditors to go check the receipts at every one of these places. The net result was, I think that we drew $29 million, and that's really the beginning of all the pay-per-view stuff that we have today.
The referee, of course, wore a bow tie, while the universal appeal of the event was expressed in the conservative dress of businessmen, politicians, and underworld chieftains, to the extravagant period costumes of black bands, to the casual look of showbiz titans. Bert Sugar.
Just to look across from ringside and see a photographer for Life magazine, Frank Sinatra. And to look down the ring and see that one of the announcers for Closed Circuit was Burt Lancaster. The crowd, it was glittery, it was showy, it was New York. It's probably the biggest night in the history of Madison Square Garden and probably of sports in New York.
Larry Merchant.
Now I can still summon in my mind's ear this incredible guttural roar from the crowd in the seconds before they were about to start the fight, of people can hardly believing that this was finally going to happen.
By the fourth, you could see that Ali was beginning to tire, and that Frazier had cut the distance and was beginning to land. And in the 11th round, Ali took a massive amount of punishment.
Frazier's trainer, Eddie Futch.
I often tease Joe about the one instance in the 11th round which he hurt Ali very badly. But Ali, being as smart as he was, he didn't want Joe to know how badly he was hurt, so he exaggerated the stagger. But Joe, not being sure that he was hurt as badly as he feigned to be, he walked casually over to him. And in those few brief seconds, Ali was able to pull himself together again. And we called it the long walk.
Bert Sugar.
He just was battered, and yet Ali wouldn't go down. But in many people's mind's eye, the fight was up for grabs going into the 15th.
Columnist Jerry Eisenberg.
I was told the story by Joe. In the 15th round, he said to me, "I'm God. Don't you know I'm God? God is my guardian. You can't stand up against the will of God. The will of God is that I win this fight. Fall, fool, fall. You can't fight God." And then Frazier said, I looked at him and I hollered, "Well, God's going to get knocked on his ass tonight." And boom, the left hook knocked him down.
Larry Merchant.
In the famous words of Angelo Dundee, Ali's trainer, Ali was out when he was hit, and he was up when his ass hit the floor, which was to say that he simply refused to stay down.
And still, heavyweight champion of the world,
professional satirist, Dr. Hunter S. Thompson.
It was the end of an era, but it seemed like when Frazier beat Ali that the bad guys had won.
Boxing historian Hank Kaplan.
This brawl was a turning point in their careers, physical-wise. They both received so much punishment as to have damaged their ability to produce maximum effort in any future fight.
The damage to Frazier was immediate. Joe Hand.
He was in the Giuffre Medical Center here in Philadelphia, and they were saying his blood pressure is this, his blood pressure is that, and it continued to go up because of kidney problems that he was experiencing from the body shots. And he was just on the verge of taking a stroke, and finally his blood pressure did start to go down. And to say Joe Frazier was in just bad physical shape after the fight, that's an understatement. He nearly died.
For Ali, a swollen jaw came with his defeat, but not a bruised ego. Harry Markson.
Well, a day or two later, when Ali showed up at my office, I said, Muhammad, you sure look like the greatest fighter in the world when you're sitting on your fanny. He said, oh, he said, you mean when I tripped over that left hook? He was very sharp.
Larry Merchant.
The fact that he was so good-humored about it probably won over a lot of the fans who thought that the result of this fight would shut his mouth. It did anything but. It was a great event.
Battered and drained even in victory, Joe Frazier could do no better than come close in chapters 2 and 3 of boxing's greatest rivalry. But Muhammad Ali would go on to win the heavyweight championship again. And for his theatrical dazzle, for his courage and skill, for his beauty, but most especially for risking his career on principle, Ali went on to become the most famous, the most beloved athlete the world has ever known. Like Jack Johnson and Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali made something of the heavyweight championship that transcended the championship itself. All three, by daring to be great, turned boxing rings into pedestals of American history. We hope you've enjoyed seeing how they did it, and we thank you for joining us in this corner.
This has been a presentation of HBO Sports, the network of champions.
It's beautiful.